Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Potvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Employees Retirement System of Georgia. One of our most important responsibilities is to help our members learn how to create for themselves a comfortable and enjoyable retirement. So let's learn something about how to do that right now. Wes Moss is a certified financial planner based in Atlanta. He's the host of Retire Sooner, a nationally recognized podcast dedicated to helping 1 million people retire sooner. Wes is also the host of Money Matters, the country's longest-running weekly call-in financial show on 95.5 WSB Atlanta's News and Talk. He's also been a financial columnist for more than a decade. He's the author of multiple books, including What the Happiest Retirees Know and the best-selling You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think. Wes, we're very glad to have you with us today.
Jim, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Wes, I hear you've done a lot of research and you have a lot to share with us about how to retire happier and sooner.
Comfortable and enjoyable, like you just said in your opening, I think is what I've tried to figure out and help retirees figure out for many, many years. And we've done tons of research around this to emulate. So we want to identify really two groups. The happiest, we call them HROBs and UROBs. So HROBs are happiest retirees on the block. UROBs are the unhappiest retirees. We want to learn from the habits from the happy group.
So let's start with the big question. What is it that makes people happy versus unhappy in retirement?
Really two sides of the equation. We've got the happy group and the unhappy group. In What the Happiest Retirees Know, we list out 30 really important habits for happy retirees to learn and emulate. We also look at that as there are habits that we need to avoid as well so that we're not unhappy. So think of it as two sides of the equation. We've got about half of those 30 habits are financial. The other 30 habits or the other half of those 30 are more lifestyle oriented. And we really want to just try to figure out a balance between the two. Not every happy retiree nails all 30 of these. So we want to be able to understand as many as we can and focus in on them as we get closer to retirement. Both sides. So it's a balance, the financial side and the lifestyle side, so that we have a much higher probability of landing in the happy retiree camp.
So could you maybe share with us what are the top 3 or so financial habits that lead to a happy retirement?
So I think of the financial side of this as just the foundation. We've got to nail these first or get these right first, and then we can move on to the lifestyle side of the equation. And here's how I would start this out. The 3 are multiple streams of income. 2, having a mortgage payoff with insight. Doesn't necessarily need to be paid off right before retirement, but with insight. And 3, $500,000 worth of liquid retirement savings. I'll start with multiple streams of income. And I think this is where Georgia State retirees have an advantage because of the pension plan. As we know, in America, more and more companies have done away with pensions. State retirees are fortunate to have that. And it's a huge piece of the happiness equation. We want multiple and different streams of income. If you think about this question, if you were going to get $10,000 a month for the rest of your life, would you rather get 10 $1,000 checks or one $10,000 check? I think about it arriving in the mail. Well, the answer is, I think logistically it might be easier just to get one check. But then you start thinking, wait a minute, what happens if something happens to that one income source? So there's higher levels of happiness associated with different and diversified ways we're getting our income. So if we have Social Security, if we have a pension, or my spouse has social, my spouse has a pension, now we start to add different checks in the mail and we get some diversification. So it's really important to do that. So more income streams is better for your financial peace of mind. We don't ever want to be able to run out of money. 2, we want to have a mortgage payoff with insight. There's a statistic that I've used for many years. We found in our research, retirees that are within 5 years of paying off the mortgage or the mortgage is paid off are 4 times more likely to end up in the happy retiree camp. So it's really powerful to get rid of that big check that so many of us, it's our biggest check we write from a long period of time in our life. We get rid of that. We have this massive peace of mind. And 3rd, even if we have different streams of income, we want to have something liquid that we can get to when financial emergencies or big ticket items come up. Maybe we have to repair our roof. Maybe we need an air conditioning system. Maybe one of our kids needs something or someone within the family need something substantial financially, we want to be able to have liquid retirement savings that's able to help with that. And by the way, that liquid retirement account can also generate income and add to an income source. So those are the three: multiple streams of income, mortgage payoff within sight, and $500,000 of liquid retirees. Those are the three, let's call it checkpoints financially for the happy retiree.
And then on the flip side, can you share a couple of habits that we would be well advised to steer clear from?
Number one, don't drive a BMW. And I don't know why that happened, but I went and I wanted to do research on the top car brands for happy and unhappy retirees. And the data came back that the number one luxury car for the unhappy camp, the unhappy retirees, happened to be a BMW. Now, I have no idea why that is. I still don't know 10 years after doing that study. I will say that I think it was BMW USA or BMW Global wrote a whole blog about how that my research was BS and that happy retirees could still drive BMWs. But that's one. So let's start there. Don't drive a BMW. I think there are a lot more. There are more important habits though that fall into the unhappy retiree camp. One is not having enough core pursuits. So once we leave work, we leave such a massive part of our lives. We have to have what we call core pursuits in the book, and those are really hobbies on steroids. They're what give you purpose in the retirement years of your life. And if you don't have them, it can make for a retirement where you're wandering and you're wondering what you should be doing, what your purpose is. Another example of an unhappy retiree is if we don't live near our children. Like our family relationships, as well as social relationships, are so critical to being a happy retiree. Our research finds that if you live away from your adult children, or if most of your adult children live in another state, levels of unhappiness actually rise. So we actually want to be close or within driving distance to our adult children.
Interesting. So what habits can we start early in our careers to start to get us on track toward that happy retirement?
There's a lot of advantages of starting early for both the financial and the lifestyle side. So when you think about starting early financially, the example I'll give, let's say we want to get to $500,000. We're going to get to $500,000 in retirement savings. If we're 25 and we're going to save for 35 years to get to 60, we can save $250 a month at a 7.5% rate of return. We get to $500,000 with $250 a month. If we wait 10 years, we start at age 35. In order to get to $500,000 by the time we're 60, we've got to save almost $7,000 a year. So it's more than double just waiting 10 years. So starting early, not just saving, but investing is so important. Same thing on the lifestyle side. If we're going to have core pursuits, and again, happy retirees have average 3.6 core pursuits. These are hobbies on steroids. Unhappy group averages less than 2. They average 1.9, so less than 2. Just like saving early gives us the magic of compounding over time, so does starting our core pursuits as early as possible so that we can cultivate what those are and we can expand on them over time. We don't want to wait until we're 60 or 65 and then say, all of a sudden, I've got to get a bunch of hobbies on steroids. At that point, you can end up kind of wandering and looking for something. We want to cultivate them as early in our careers as possible.
So most of our current active employees and everybody new that we hire with the state come into a retirement system that has both a pension and a 401k with an employer match. Why is it important for our employees to focus on getting that full employer match in the 401k?
There are very few things that can compete with just time in investing. It's always about time, not timing. So the more time we have in as investors, typically the better that we do. The one thing I would say that's maybe even more powerful that would be free money. So if you're going to get an employer match to a 401k, and not everyone gets, not every program in the world has that, and not every company even has retirement plans. So if you're going to get a match, which is free money, then we want to take advantage of it.
So I know you've been thinking a lot lately about our current challenging economy. You know, the markets are pulling back. inflation, of course, is very high and difficult to deal with. Should employees still be focused on contributing to their retirement funds even in times like this?
I would say absolutely yes. If we were always waiting for the perfect time and the sky is blue and markets are great, then we'd rarely get a chance to invest. Markets are constantly pulling back and recovering and pulling back and recovering and sideways. Markets are volatile. The one thing that can reduce that volatility over time is just consistent investing. So even when we're in a challenging environment, a rough economy, maybe a bad stock market, it's actually advantageous to us to systematically continue to invest. In fact, it's even better when markets are down. We're able to buy more shares with the same amount of dollars. And ultimately, when we get a recovery over long periods of time, you're that much better off. So I would encourage folks that even if the economy is not great or the market isn't bad, it's even a better time to typically be saving.
And on a similar theme, how can employees prioritize retirement when they're also trying to buy a house or pay off student debt or whatever their other financial priorities are?
So it's always a balance to try to figure out the cost of living today with retirement in the future. What I see happy retirees do is figure out a level where they're paying themselves first, always. So whether that's 10% or 20% of income, depending what you can handle as a family, once you made a commitment to paying yourself first, then you can start to make decisions on things like housing and education, because you know that priority number one, which is taking care of you and your family, you and your spouse in retirement, as long as that is already being worked on, then you know what you have left over for all the other big financial decisions. But it's always a tough, careful balance. I think another really important piece of the equation here is happy retirees spend at least a little bit of time doing some sort of financial planning and communicating with their spouse, or thinking about retirement. Whether you're married or not married, at least thinking about your own future retirement. And doing some sort of financial planning goes such a long way. There are great online resources to do financial planning. There are multiple resources, obviously, in the state of Georgia where you can go get help in doing some sort of financial plan. There are very few things that I see people give happy retirees more peace of mind than a little bit of financial planning. A little bit of planning could go a very long way.
And again, we're talking about doing this earlier rather than later, right? Start those plans early so that you have plenty of time to fulfill.
I think the prevailing thought is that we do financial planning 5 years before retirement. The reality here is that beyond just saving for retirement, planning for retirement in our 30s, that might sound crazy, but it makes for being 50 and 60 that much easier. So it's never too early, 30s, 40s, 50s, to start doing some sort of financial planning. It makes the end part of the journey that much easier.
So I'm an employee, I'm in the middle of my career, I have been saving money toward retirement, but my kids are getting close to college age. Should I consider taking money out of my retirement assets to pay for their college?
There's very few absolutes in financial planning. One of them is pretty close to an absolute, is you do not want to spend your retirement money for your kids' education. You can borrow for kids' education, you cannot borrow for retirement. We almost never want to pull from retirement funds, 401ks, in order to be able to pay for kids' education. I think paying for education has gotten really expensive. Now, if you're in the state of Georgia, hopefully your kids will go to school and look at the Hope Scholarship and it will be less expensive. But the way I see families typically tackle education savings will be that the third rule, where parents are typically still working while their kids are in college and they can contribute while they're working, kind of paying as you're still working for education. 2 would be savings, college education savings that you've done over time. And then 3 is on the students. If the student has some skin in the game, either they pay for a portion while they're either working and paying for school, or they get loans that, again, gives them some skin in the game. That way we divide up the really expensive cost of education.
Our state employee pension system currently allows members to retire with 30 years of service, regardless of their age. So it's not uncommon for us to have folks retiring in their early to mid 50s. What financial considerations are there for employees who want to retire early from the state with the 30 years?
I think this is one of the greatest things about the Georgia State pension. This is also true for a lot of teachers in the state of Georgia, where if you put in 30 years, you end up having this really, really significant, what can be a very significant pension. And you're in a position, if you've also saved money as well, to be able to do something else. Now, if you love your job and you love working for the state of Georgia, then that pension can grow even further over time. So if you still like working for the state, and I'll say this typically with any individual that has a good pension program, so not just Georgia State retirees, that the longer you stay, typically the better it is. And those monthly payments in retirement just keep going up. But if you're ready for something else, and maybe it's a second act career, you're in a wonderful position to have some sort of financial security pretty early on in your 50s, maybe it's early 60s, and then do something else, particularly because Social Security doesn't kick in until at least age 62. And it may not be the right choice to take Social Security as early as 62. So if we retire really early at 55, we really typically want to be able to do some sort of other work. I call this the retirement gray zone or semi-retirement, until at least we get to that Social Security age.
Okay, so some of our employees are in the home stretch. They've got maybe 5 years or so left to go before their planned retirement date. What's your advice for them on how they should be preparing at this point?
So if you're in the home stretch, there's a couple of things I would think about. One, we talk about financial planning. Again, key to update any sort of financial plan. So what are our assets today? How much more do we think we're going to save? What are our income streams going to be in retirement? And then how are we going to fund if there's any sort of gap beyond our income streams and what we need to do from a spending perspective? Any sort of financial plan should be able to spell that out and give you peace of mind that retirement is going to be funded. Secondly, I would really be looking at what those income streams, particularly for the pension, are going to look like and start thinking about the options around the pension plan. Do we want to do 100% joint survivor? Do we want to do a single? Is there any, what combination works for you and your retirement plan? Another happy retiree trait, as years to pay off mortgage come down, happiness levels go up. It's one of my favorite charts in You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think and what the happiest retirees know. It's not just about the financial side of the equation, it's the peace of mind not having to write that mortgage check. We also want to be really mindful around our core pursuits and think, what am I going to be doing if I'm not working for the state of Georgia? What are my 3 to 4 different core pursuits that are my hobbies and loves that I'll be working on every day? Also, as we prepare to leave, let's say, the workforce, we have had so many years around our peers and they become our social fabric, or at least they're a big part of our socialization. When you're 5 years out in retirement, we need to start thinking about, well, what's going to replace that group? If I'm not going to see interact every day with these people I've known for 10, 20, 30 years, how am I going to replace my social network? And it's a really important piece of the equation that we almost take for granted as we're working. We've been with these folks for all these years. How are we going to replace and augment that socialization is so key as we're doing once we hit that 5-year mark looking forward.
So you've mentioned core pursuits a couple of different times. Can you give us some examples of what those core pursuits might look like for certain people?
Yeah, core pursuits are so important. It's such a big piece of the equation. One of the first things I learned about happy versus unhappy retirees is that happy retirees have 3.6 core pursuits on average. Unhappy group has 1.9. So almost 4 and less than 2. Core pursuits are hobbies on steroids. And I use the example of golf. Golf doesn't have to be a core pursuit because the reality is it doesn't matter what your core pursuits are. They just have to be things that you love. But if you're a golfer, you typically are wanting to play golf multiple times a month, many times throughout the year. Not 365 days a year, but not once or twice either. If you play golf once or twice, it's probably not a core pursuit. Or anything you do that's once or twice a year, that doesn't necessarily qualify as something you love. It's not a core pursuit. But something you look forward to and you want to do really all the time, that ends up being a core pursuit. And again, it doesn't matter what they are. It could be, first of all, hiking, biking, running, swimming, any sort of exercising. We call them the INGs. Active core pursuits are a huge choice of the happy retiree. It can be gardening. It can be traveling with friends, and it can be volunteering. The number one core pursuit for happy retirees is volunteering. So it doesn't matter what the core pursuit is. What matters is that you have many of them to give you purpose once you've stopped working full time. As an example for core pursuits, my father's a veterinarian. He ran a veterinary practice for 40 some years, I think 43 years before he finally decided to retire. And he wrote a letter to his client base announcing his retirement. And he listed out all the things that he's looking forward to doing. And I remember reading this letter thinking, wow, this guy's got a lot of core pursuits. And he listed out 14 different things that he was looking forward to doing. He has a small farm in Pennsylvania, so he likes to ride horses. He's got a giant garden that he tends to every day. It's a big part of his life. He even does, he listed this out, he does cowboy poetry, which I was like, Dad, I don't even know what cowboy poetry is. Turns out it's very similar to writing and playing country music. So he plays guitar, but he even goes to cowboy poetry symposiums or conferences where he's able to meet other songwriters and do cowboy poetry. So it doesn't matter what you do, it just matters that you have a long list of things that you love. Jim, I'm going to throw it back to you. This is the podcast interview studio here. If you were to retire tomorrow, which we don't want you to do, do you have 3 to 4 things that you love doing that are core pursuits?
It's funny you bring up golf. What I do is only barely playing golf, so I don't know if I can list that one as a core pursuit. But certainly there's, my whole life to this point has been about raising the family, and they're starting to get a little bit older now. But I can imagine a time when there'll be grandchildren, and you talk about being close to them and being parts of their lives. My wife definitely wants to do some traveling. Cruises is a big part of it. We have the house with the garden and the yard to take care of, so we'll have a few things to do.
By the way, you mentioned travel. Very interesting. One of the surprising things that I learned in our research is that one of the biggest happiness boosters we found, kind of unexpectedly, is traveling with friends. If you take one trip per year with not just you or you and your spouse, but with another couple or multiple couples or groups, happiness levels you're 2 times more likely to end up being a happy retiree. So whether it's you going on a cruise, by the way, there are thematic cruises now where you can almost get a cruise for any sort of interest under the sun. But if you do that and travel with friends, we list that as a big happiness booster in what the happiest retirees now.
I'll get working on the invitation list. What legal or financial documents should folks have? And I'm really talking about at any age, right? We're not just saying at retirement or earlier in your career.
Yeah, I remember so certainly we need a will. Nobody wants to do a will because we're thinking about our demise. And I remember the first time I ended up doing a will, we were going to a wedding in Costa Rica. And my wife said, we had just had our first child, and I've still with my first of 4 boys. And he was 6 months old, and she said, "Look, we're not getting on a plane going to Central America or South America until you have a will." And so that was the first time that kind of forced me to do a will, and I updated it every time we had a child. But so will is critical to get done, and then some sort of what we call a durable power of attorney. Again, it doesn't have to take years, months, weeks. It doesn't have to be expensive, but some sort of a durable power of attorney allows for someone you trust in your life to be able to help take over if you become incapacitated. So from a medical perspective, from a financial perspective. So we want to be able to also not just do a will, understand who our beneficiaries, we want to be on our retirement accounts, but also look at some estate planning with power of attorneys. Another really important piece of the equation is to really think about our legacy. Who do we want to be leaving our money to? Who do we want to leave our house to? If it's you and your spouse, well, what's the next generation and what makes sense for them? So that's a very big part of the equation as well.
Certainly in our world, whenever there's a life event, well, first of all, we want people to make sure that they've designated a beneficiary, right? If they want to leave their retirement to somebody, then they need to tell us who that's going to be. And after every life event, whether it's a divorce or birth of a child or anything like that, we need them to look at it again and update that, because It's really a tragedy when somebody forgets to update a beneficiary, and then we end up having to pay somebody that they did not intend to have paid to begin with.
Yeah, it could be messy.
Very much so. Adult children and grandchildren clearly have an impact on retirees. I talked about it earlier. How much money, though, is too much to spend on adult children?
So children and adult children really play such a huge role in our financial lives and our happiness at retirement. And more and more adult children are living at home today than really ever in history. We look at, or in modern history, so we see the percentage of 18 to 29-year-olds, it's more than 50% of 18 to 29-year-olds are living at home with their parents. So happy retirees tend to have more independent children. We want our children to be independent. But what's really interesting about this is that we asked in our research levels of how much are we supporting our adult children. Now, I'm not just talking about Christmas presents and helping out with a trip to Disney. I'm talking about supporting car payments, tuition, mortgage payments. And what's really interesting, the data came back that happy retirees spend less than $500 a month on average for their adult children. Unhappy retirees spend over $700 a month. So unhappy retirees, what I learned from that research, or what I gleaned from that, is that if our children are less independent and less financially independent, then we end up having to support them that much more. And that cuts into our retirement. And there's a lot of emotional tug of war that goes along with that as well, not to mention the financial part. So how much is too much? I don't know if there's a perfect answer there, but certainly less is better for ending up as a happy retiree.
So wherever I'm at today, less tomorrow is probably going to be a good thing.
Correct. I mean, I think you've got one in college and maybe two in college before you know it. And sure, they're going to need some help, right? College is expensive, the world is expensive, but the sooner our kids can be financially independent, the better for them and the better for our retirements.
So I know that when my kids were quite a bit younger, I broke out the Excel spreadsheet and showed them the power of compound interest. It's one of the first early lessons that I showed them. But there's certainly a lot more in terms of a financial education that they could benefit from.
Jim, I can just see you breaking out the Excel spreadsheet, and your daughter's probably rolling their eyes. But the reality here is that any sort of financial education is so important early on. If we can understand things like the power of compounding, the power of being able to be invested in over long periods of time, the power of something as simple as having some sort of budget so that we don't overspend on a mortgage and that we're paying ourselves first. If we can help our kids early on understand those lessons, then we have a higher probability that they're independent kids, which leads to a much higher probability that you're going to end up a happy retiree.
Well, and you want to spark their curiosity, right? They still remember. They don't necessarily remember the numbers, but they remember that I pulled out the Excel spreadsheet for them. And they asked me questions today about my job that maybe they wouldn't have been inspired to do that before. So,
I think this goes back, Jim, to just communication, right? Whether it's you and a spouse communicating about what your wants and needs are in retirement, or it's you and your kids talking about how are we going to pay for education, and then how are they going to become financially independent. Happy retirees communicate about money. Now, they don't obsess about it. They don't talk about it every day. But we see on average, happy retirees spend 1 to 2 hours a month discussing their finances and doing some sort of financial plan. It's not a whole lot. Unhappy retirees tend to kind of put their head in the sand and don't talk about it at all. So whether it's us and our kids or us and our spouses talking about the future, it's a really powerful, those are powerful and important conversations.
For us and our parents at this point, right?
For so many folks that are close to retirement or in retirement, you're exactly right. It may be not just them and their spouse, but also their adult parents in their 80s and 90s that they're now responsible to help take care of as well.
What are the ways that kids directly impact a parent's happiness in retirement?
One really important piece of the happiness equation here when it comes to our adult children is proximity. So our research shows that happiness levels actually fall for retirees if our adult children are living at home. Maybe it means they're not as financially independent as we wanted them to be. So we don't want our kids to live with us when we're in retirement. but we do want our kids to live near us. And one of my favorite charts in What the Happiest Retirees Know is a study around proximity to our kids. If we live as retirees, if we live near 50% of our children or more of our children, we're 2 to 5 times more likely to end up as happy retirees. So if you have 4 kids and you live in the state of Georgia and all 4 kids live on the West Coast, that's not a good scenario. We want to be near our kids. We want at least 2 of our 4 kids to be living near us. 4 is probably better than 2. And if it's only 2, maybe you can pick your favorite 2 that you live close by.
In all the years of research and all the copious amounts of data you've collected, what's something that stands out as particularly surprising to you?
Again, I think of this as this long list, almost a recipe, an old family recipe of 30 things we want to try to do. We can't do all 30 of them. And I think beyond the financial checkpoints, because that's not surprising to me. When I was doing the research, I wanted to see what were those levels, because we want to get to some sort of levels. We want to get to some sort of fundamentally sound levels financially. What was surprising about all the research I've done is this plateauing effect, meaning that in the early stages of accumulating money or making more money, happiness levels tend to rise pretty dramatically. But once we get to a certain inflection point, we almost get what I call diminishing marginal happiness, meaning that more dollars don't necessarily lead to more happiness. So we want to get to a certain level, we talk about it in both books, of income. We want to get us to a certain level of retirement savings, but after that level, and we're financially going to be comfortable, more money doesn't necessarily lead to more happiness. And
so this is meeting your basic needs, essentially.
Being able to be at a point where we are going to have financial comfort and not worry about running out of money. It's one of the greatest human fears we have. So once we take care of that need, happiness levels don't rise nearly as much or stop rising once we already have some level of financial comfort.
So as we wrap up our conversation, and we do appreciate the time you spent with us today, what's the best advice you can give us for our current state workforce?
I think that Georgia State retirees are in a good position, or a really good position relative to a lot of folks in America. The fact that there's a robust pension plan and a 401k to have liquid retirement savings is a really great setup for a happy retirement. I think that thinking about that whole list of habits of happy retirees, not just the financial part, but yes, multiple streams of income, important. Liquid retirement savings, important. Getting rid of the mortgage, important. But the whole other side of your financial and retirement life, your core pursuits, your socialization, the relationship you have with your kids and your family, it's really the totality of that, of all of that together, that I think is so important to understand. In the book, I list out 30 habits of happy retirees. We don't need to do all 30 of them, but I think it's important to kind of understand and emulate what the happiest retirees in America do. I think the more of that list of 30 we do, the higher the probability we end up with a wonderful retirement. And if we're good on a lot of them, we can even get better. So it's really thinking about the big picture, the financial side, the lifestyle side, and putting it all together.
So what can you offer for our current retirees? We have almost as many of them as we have actual employees at this point.
Once you're in retirement, it should be just as dynamic and fulfilling as when you're working. But it takes a lot of work to do so. Once we leave the workforce, we've got to make extra effort to make sure that we have socialization and that we have a good group of close connections, which sometimes takes some work. We want to constantly be working on and evolving our core pursuits so that we have this constant list of hobbies on steroids that we can continue to improve and get better at. I think the happiest retirees I know are curious. They're curious and they continue to want to expand what they're doing. And they look at retirement as this long journey, not just an event, but a long journey that can be just as fulfilling, maybe even more fulfilling and more fun than their working years.
Wes, thank you so much for taking time to help educate our Georgia employees. Can you tell us how we can learn more about your Retire Happy message?
It has been a pleasure speaking to the state of Georgia employees and retirees. To learn more on how you can be one of the happiest retirees on the block, visit me at wesmoss.com. That's WESMOSS.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Wes. And to learn more about your state retirement benefits, please visit us at ers.ga.gov. Thank you.